Okay, everyone. So this is the first time I've heralded. Let's see how this goes, and it's actually the first time I've seen anyone herald on this conference. So welcome to davedarko's presentation on what I learned from making an 1836 LED dodecahedron. There you go. All right. To me, it feels like an exercise in calculating. Like my head goes, what's 1836 and what's 12 faces and how does this all work? So I'm really excited to hear this talk. If you have questions to Dave, I guess at the end, we're kind of easy on time because there's no other talks following. But questions can be had in English or in German. And you can also meet him in xHain or PCBs. Take it away.
Yeah, Mastodon, for example. Hi, everybody, and thanks for showing up. This is the blinky dodecahedron. Welcome. Right. So let's talk about this thing and how I clickbaited you to get here, because it's not technically 1,836 LEDs. When you think about it, that RGB LEDs are encased in one little thing. So it's 612 RGB LEDs, but I feel like every color should be counted. And it sounds more. Yay. All right. Ooh. Yeah, that sounds like a fun thing to root on a 4-layer board. So who am I? I call myself davedarko on the internet, and also sometimes a hoarder of things and maker of stuff, which basically means I have 105, that's not even accurate anymore, it's 107 public projects on Hackaday.io. It's a little community platform where you can share projects. And in the time I prepared this talk, I also went on a different route and was working on 3 new projects, as you do, I guess. Then there are like probably 20 more projects that are private on Hackaday. And then there are the other projects that I don't document on Hackaday, but on Mastodon, for example. It was Twitter before, but oh well. Right, and I'm also kind of a hoarder because I have probably 3 microcontrollers per project that I just said, somewhere in a drawer. So yeah, go me. You might not have seen me, but maybe you have seen a project of mine on Twitter, for example. This was my unfinished PCB replacement for Calculator Watch, but it was good enough for Hackaday to be covered, so that's nice. It's basically a replacement for the whole smartwatch, so you can have an ARM-based controller in there that controls the LCD, which sounds fun, but then I noticed that the keyboard, that I forgot diodes, so I can't really read any of the buttons. So that was something that's in the drawer. Welcome. And I might work on it next year when I'm motivated enough. Some friends offered help, which is also very nice. Then there's the unfinished Wi-Fi Game Boy cartridge. That's an ESP32 board where I just wanted to communicate directly, kind of directly through the I/O converters to the Game Boy. So technically, you almost have enough pins on the ESP32 to communicate with the Game Boy. But yeah, then I found out that the pins are kind of slow, even though the ESP32 runs at 240 megahertz, which was weird. Anyways, and then there's also the unfinished Space Invaders LED handhelds that probably people haven't seen that often, but I kind of like it. It's pretty cool. It just needs to finish the software. But yeah. So what are we here today to talk about, though, is the LED dodecahedron. I'm going to turn it on because I wanted to save battery because the other one broke just before I wanted to put it in. Also happen always have 2 batteries with you when you present one, because it can happen that your cable breaks off the battery. Yay. So yeah, dodecahedron, or as I like to say, the power of the sun in the palm of my hand. I waited to do that for a long time. But yeah, so dodecahedron. 3 years ago, at SuperCon at the Hackaday SuperCon, it's a little 400 people gathering of cool people in Pasadena. Greg Davill from Australia brought this D20 LED cube thing, and everybody was like, "Oh wow, this is so nice!" And I was also like, "Oh wow, this is so nice! I want to have it." And it's actually 2,400 RGB LEDs on that cube, which is a lot more than I have. But yeah, it was so nice, and I later saw it again at the Congress at the 36C3, and also there was a big installation from the hackspace that I joined, xHain hack+makespace, and they had this huge dodecahedron with LED sites on top of the assembly, and it was I think 30 meters or even 60 meters because it was on both sides LED strips on there. It took a lot of power, and I was like, okay, we have the D20 and the xHain has the D12. I'm gonna make a little D12 thing. And just 2 years later, like last year, I finally started to work on this project. So dodecahedron, that sounds quite like a mouthful. D20 makes it a bit easier, but there's some things you should know. It's a platonic solid. That's one of 5 bodies that have the same shapes on the outside, and they're congruent. So yeah, that's special apparently. And I kind of like the dodecahedron, so it was nice to start working on this one. It has 12 sides. That's the dodeca part of it. Yeah, and they are pentagon shaped, and then there's an angle of 72 degrees that you have to consider, and then there's also something that I had to first learn how to Google. There's an angle between the sides of the dodecahedron, and that's called the dihedral angle, and it's, what is it, the arccos of -1 divided by the square root of 5, which is easy to remember, I guess. But yeah, it's a weird number, but it works if you wanna design a case for that in OpenSCAD, like I did, which you maybe not want to do. But yeah. Let's talk about the hardware decisions, or, well, I kind of cheated and I didn't make the decision for myself. I looked at what Greg did, because there's always the question, do you use the neopixels, the very smart LEDs, RGB LEDs, that basically take data and then give it away to the next? So if you want to route something like this, you have always just to connect 2 lines from LED to LED, and then there's the ground pin that can basically be connected through I forgot the word, but yeah, the whole thing can be ground, and then you just have to wire the data line and the power line, which is kind of easy. With the approach that I did with the controller for lots of LEDs, I had to have all the 4 pins go to the controller, and then there's some cross connections that you have to consider. Yeah, so this would speak for the neopixels to be used, but there's one thing. When you have the neopixels, there's a chip inside that takes 0.5 milliamp up to 1 milliamp just to be there, to sit in your project. And when you have a cube like this with 612 LEDs, or smart LEDs, then you have a power consumption of just the ICs in the LEDs without glowing of 612 milliamps. So in the size of this little dodecahedron here, there only fits so much battery. And in here is 800 milliamps, so if you have something that just by turned off or not showing anything takes 612 milliamps, well then that's gonna be a very dark light show for an hour. Right. So the controller that I used controls the LEDs. It's just 1 chip, and you can also set a maximum brightness level, and then the PWM value reacts accordingly. So you have room to play within the settings you give yourself, which is also nice. So when I had the first animation running, I had this rainbow pattern on the whole thing, and it was 412 milliamps. So if I would have the whole rainbow thing, the whole rainbow animation on this show glowing, I would have 2 hours of that, which is nice. Right. There's a bit of a speed consideration, but I'm going into detail with that a bit later. Okay. So with the 612 LEDs that I have, it was 420 milliamps. Just showing something. So that means, yeah, whatever it means. I've never tested 612 neopixels with the same animation. That kind of sounded, yeah, that's just too much work just to compare this in the talk, I guess. But yeah, right. Okay. So yeah, I made the decision for the controller for controlling the LEDs, and then there was also the question, how do I control the controller? And there are some little boards that Adafruit sell, and Xiao as well, Seed Studio. They are very small boards that only have like maybe 10 pads where you can solder on something, which is for me totally fine because I only need 2 wires to talk to the controller because it talks I2C. And that meant I had this range of cool little tiny boards that either have something that talks Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, like the ESP32 boards. There are some certain ranges. And then there's also the NRF52840 series. There are like 2 boards, and one even comes with an IMU, like an accelerometer thing that tells you how it's moved. And then there's also a microphone in there. So you get this, it's not even 1 inch by 1 inch board with USB-C, even a charger is integrated. So there's a lot of stuff you can use for this project or projects like this. And other people have used it as well for nice little glowy things. One downside is that I currently only can run the I2C clock at 400 kilohertz, and with the ESP32 boards, it's supposed to be faster. It's 1 megahertz, which is the top speed that the controller also can talk, like every chip that's on the backside of the LEDs. Yeah, so if I ever figure out how to get a faster I2C bus from the Xiao, then this would be very nice. So there was a bit of a process. I was researching lots of chips and how to do this and what chips could I use. And then from the chips, I would know how many LEDs I can control. And with the amount of LEDs, then I was working with this arrangement of the LEDs. I was trying to figure out how many LEDs can I get on this PCB in the way I chose to arrange them, and like how many chips I would have to use. So if I would want to have more than 51 LEDs on one side, then I would definitely have to use 2 chips, and that makes it a bit more complicated. Yeah. I also forgot to say that the chip that I use has an address range, which is kind of nice. I can use at least 16 chips on the same bus, which means I don't have to use any I2C communication thing in between the controller and the LED controller. So I can just send the data out, set the address bits on the PCBs, and then everything is fine. I just have to go with 4 wires from one board to the next, which is also a good thing if you don't have that much space. Right. So I was starting to design this board in November when I was visiting my sister, and I had like 2 or 3 weeks where I just was like, okay, I'm sitting here, I have my computer, I don't have anything that can distract me because everything is at home. And I started routing the board and started to find out how I can, where I can put the LEDs. And then I redid everything again because I then found out it's easier when I do something a bit different. And at one point I arrived here where I got the PCB, and I was then using JLC PCB for the first time to populate the LEDs on there. So that was kind of fast, which was nice. And it was my first 4-layer board, and that checked it out. And they got back to me and were like, hey, do you really want to have your LEDs upside down? Or, I mean, we can totally turn them for you so that it makes sense. I'm like, oh, good catch. So yeah, they turned the LEDs, and that worked superbly, almost. And yeah, so it was, I had to order 15 boards, but only needed 12. So I have some spares, which is also nice when you tinker with something that you haven't really worked with before. But yeah, one little downside, but you can probably not see it from there. It's just green boards. And I also didn't tell them to remove the order number from the board. So when you see it in person, there's a little order number. But when it's turned on, you basically don't see that anymore. Right. Oh, the almost worked perfectly part was that when I was routing everything and moving parts in the schematics bits, I was like, I've placed them very well. They were all aligned, except for LED D25. And the cool thing about KiCad is even that it tells you, hey, there's like an LED and it's not connected on one pin. But I didn't read that or didn't notice that or didn't care at that point and thought, yeah, I did that right. Anyways, I had this one LED that wasn't turned on. And yeah, that was a bit of a bummer. So I had to go in and rework every panel with, I call it magnet wire. It's also called animal wire. You have to scratch off a bit so you can actually solder it, and then you have to bend it and hopefully don't have scratched off somewhere else so that it shorts to some different place that you want to have it short. And anyways, I made it work. It was kind of okay to do. You just had to get in there with a soldering iron and then, yeah, fix that. So definitely do the design rule check for that. Run it often, as much as you can. Also, to get to the point to have all the LEDs except for one glowing, I also had to bend an LED leg and then connect one of the 3 volts lines to the chip with an LED leg. And yeah, that was interesting. 15 times. Yeah, so I can just tell you, you should definitely have a little bag of LED legs or resistor legs from the through-hole soldering. Just have it in a bag, have it in a little box, and then you can always fix boards when they come in and there's something to fix. Yeah, the other thing that I noticed when I ran the library was that the capacitors were singing, and this is because there weren't that many capacitors and they were very small. So yeah, luckily you can reduce the brightness of the chips, which also meant that there's not that much current draw on the capacitors, so they were quiet when I turned it down from half the brightness to maybe a fifth or a sixth. Yeah. When you're at that point where you have your PCBs and they work and you have them laying on your table, you're like, okay, I need to do something about the case now. And I knew that I wanted to be able to open the halves, but before I went with magnets, I just had them, yeah, stuck together. But yeah, it took me a while to design this in an OpenSCAD, and thanks to the dihedral angle of arccos -1 divided by square 5, whatever. Yeah, so when you started to get your groove in OpenSCAD, of course, and then you have to print it. And I'm a big fan of the filament printers. Printing in PLA is fine, PETG is nice. And I even tried to print this with a 0.2 millimeter nozzle, which means it's finer and it could be printing it a bit better. But yeah, I quickly realized if I want to print this, I have to print this with resin. And that was annoying. yeah, resin stinks. Resin isn't really healthy in any case. So working with that was a pain. You have to clean up everything very well afterwards. I'm really happy that I've never touched a resin printer after this again. This is like 6 months ago now. Yeah, you can avoid it, do so. Hey, don't be scared. Right, so when I had everything going, the cube showed an animation where it just turned on a rainbow pattern on the whole thing, and then it turned off. But the whole turning all the LEDs on took half a second. So I was at the point where I was like, okay, I might have miscalculated. And to be fair, I've never calculated anything about the speed before. So you have to ask yourself, okay, you're talking to a lot of LEDs via I2C, which is considered very slow. You should maybe calculate how fast it could be. And this is what I did here, and I hope this is a bit readable. I just went through how many LEDs do I have in theory. I have 12 PCBs, 64 LEDs per PCB, and yeah, the LEDs are RGB, so I have 3 bytes resulting out of that. So it's 2,304 bytes that I have to send to make the whole thing glow. That's without any setup values that I have to send to the controller so that it knows that you want to turn on the LED or something like this. It's just the data would be 2,304 bytes. And a byte here in I2C means that you have the byte and then always an acknowledging bit. So would be 20,000 bits. And if you take the 20,000 bits and just see how many bits you can put on the 400 kilohertz of the I2C data, then you should be able to get 19 frames per second on the whole cube thing. So it's that's not super fast. It's not the refresh rate of 60 hertz that you have on your TV or here 30, but it's fast enough to maybe show a GIF, which I can't. Spoiler alert. Right, so 19 frames per second, that's the main thing we want to take from the slide. Right, so I was looking into the software, and what I figured out, the animation that I was showing was, it went to the controller and said, hey, we're going to send commands now. And then it was, okay, we want to send PWM values now. And then it told the thing, hey, I want to set this LED, just like red, green, or blue from the LED. We want to set this to this value. So when you do this, do it like this, and you have 612 LEDs, you basically run 612 times to those commands of 6 bytes. Okay. I have no idea where we are in this talk right now. Okay, so that was basically why I got 20 frames per second out of this. I was looking into the code, and the code and in the data sheet of the chip controller, it was like, okay, you can also just go through this one time and then keep sending values for your LEDs, which is what I then did, and I got to 10 frames per second, which was nice. But also, 10 frames versus 19 frames max, that didn't feel right. So I was like, okay, I finally have to turn on my scope. And yeah, I don't really like to turn on my oscilloscope, but this is what I saw. That's I2C. The top one is the clock, and the bottom one is the data. And this is not what it should look like. It should be a bit more square, and there should be more things that look like a square wave, and this is way too sharp. So there are things called pull-up resistors that you should use with I2C, which I sometimes forget to put on boards and designs. Yeah, so you can also kind of see that there, it says 10 US, and then it's twice the thing, so it's 5 microseconds, which means it's running at 200 kilohertz and not 400 kilohertz. There's a thing called clock stretching, where some chips can decide okay, this is going too fast, I can't really work with that, I'm doing something to the clock, so you have to talk to me not that fast. And okay, and then I was like, okay, we should use the pull-ups. I added the pull-up resistors, and then I was achieving 400 kilohertz, which was nice, and I got 16 frames per second. And I think there's lots of things that happen in between the frames that I could maybe even optimize, but also when I find out how to reach the 1 megahertz speed of I2C communication, then this should be faster as well. So this is the where, and that's where I want to go with optimizing maybe. Right. So everybody who saw the cube was like, "Oh, that's so nice, and I want to have one too." And I'm like, "Well, I paid 200 euros." And then you saw them quickly, calculating in there, like, "Oh no, that's not." So technically, the parts in there are 160 euros, but there were so many things that I bought, and here it says 206 euros, but also there's no resin in there, and I technically bought a 3D printer for that, which I don't calculate in because that's, I think it was 700 euros. But yeah, so there are many things, and also failed prints and stuff like this, and the time you're spending putting everything together. It's a lot. But you pay for something, and you also have benefits coming from that. You get to know people that also like to run around at social events with glowing cubes and cubes, spheres, and then they want to make selfies, and that's cool. And oh, look, there's Alex in the middle. Anyway, he found himself. And also Greg Davill, who made the D20, couldn't be there at the SuperCon where I was with this year, but the wonderful Amy Double D, the hand model for holding the D20 of Greg Davill was there. So I was like, hey, could we maybe replicate this picture? And yeah, she was nice enough to do it. And then I had this, and yeah, Greg was like, hey, that looks nice. So in the future, everybody's probably like, why is there a waffle? So if you closely look at the waffle, I just realized looking at this this morning, I was like, wait, that's like 5 things, and they have like this little arrangement. You can technically put LEDs on the dodecahedron like this as well. So maybe I'm taking a little design decision here. Just get rid of the center LED, and then I'll try this next. Maybe not, but I liked it. So yeah, but I still have to figure out some mapping on this cube so I can get some animations done. But yeah, and the last time I worked on this was just mainly focused on getting it talk faster. Yeah. Oh yeah, and also I should be able to talk to it with Bluetooth at one point, or have a little web server on it running if I get the SP32 running, stuff like this. But yeah, that's a lot of software. That's not my strong suit for finishing projects. Yeah, you can find the project over on GitHub and on Hackaday.io. I'm documenting some things that I discovered on Hackaday.io, and I should update GitHub, or at least check if I uploaded the changes of the PCB files, so that if anybody is crazy enough to order PCBs like that they should work, and that people don't have to fix them with magnet wire, I guess. That would be nice. Yeah, and also you can find me at the xHain hack+makespace. Mondays, we have the open Mondays. You can also find me on Matrix, on Mastodon, and on Hackaday.io. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. That was super awesome, and it really looks nice when it's switched on.
I should turn it on.
So I hear the microphones are available for questions. If you want to ask questions, I can pass it around, or you can walk up. Do we have any questions? No questions. Okay.
Okay.
It's been a really good talk. Well, thank
Yeah, thank you.
And
I tried to answer all the, why did you not use NeoPixel questions? That was the one that I was expecting, so yeah, I'm happy. Cool.
Actually, I do have a question.
Oh.
Use the microphone. So did you make use, or are you also planning to make use of the accelerometers in the chips?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of some things. That
You can probably do some nice animations that just react on shaking. Like one thing that I want to do is have an animation, and then when I shake it, that it gets brighter. So you have something like a shake, and then it's a dark tunnel, and then you see more. Yeah, or microphones where you're just walking around, and then there's some music playing, and it suddenly starts blinking intensively to the music. That would be nice too. I think there's a question now.
What kind of software or libraries did you use on the nRF52?
Ooh. So I'm an avid user of Arduino, and I just found the library for the IS31 for the controller that controls the LEDs, and yeah, that's basically it. Arduino. It also has the Xiao boards, and they come with a library for Arduino, so you can install this. You can get the library, then you have to hack the library that it sends out the bursts, and then you should be good to go.
Why did you choose to use?
Ooh.
Why did you choose to use a resin printer? Just because no supports, or?
Oh, right. Yeah. So filament printers are good for just lots of structural things, but when you have this shape and print it like this, you get into weird things when you want to print this. So you have to use support. That doesn't always work good, and the case is actually snap fit. So the PCBs are in here, and I can just snap them in, I guess. So that doesn't work with the filament prints, because then you have a lot of stuff that's squeezed out more or not really, and then it gets fragile, especially here, because the break lines are very small. Not yet. Yeah, that's the software part again, but yeah. For having nice animations on this, you kind of need a nice refresh rate first. So that was my purpose to get this running. And actually, when you look long enough on this animation, you get hypnotized, and then you think it's the best thing that you've ever seen. So why would you need other animations? That's a good question that I don't understand. Sorry, and you mean like is there an arm in there, or? Yeah, it is. I forgot which Cortex thingy, but yeah, let's see. Yeah. Sorry? M4 is it? Okay, nice. Yeah, like I said, Arduino. Okay. Thank you.